Good morning, everybody. Welcome to SAA HQ, coming to you live from here in Newark. It's very lovely to have you join us. We've got 3 audiences today. So as you can probably see, I've got the lovely audience in front of me who are looking very glamorous from the backs of their heads, which is what the audience at home can see. I have a lovely live audience at home. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I do hope that if you're in the UK, you are staying very warm. It's snowy outside. And also, of course, we've got a catch-up audience as well. So if you're watching this in the summer, then you're probably warm and toasty and it's beautiful sunshine outside. You are very welcome too. Today we are doing the Portland Bill painting, and Portland Bill is a subject that I know very well. It is from my home county of Dorset, quite an old lighthouse built in 1906, and we're going to experiment with lots of different techniques today. Please don't worry if you have no painting experience whatsoever. I promise I will take you through it step by step, and we will go through it carefully so that you understand all the techniques and we don't have too much of a rush on our hands. First thing I'm going to do is take you through the materials. If you are watching on catch up, this gives you time to pause. Somebody would love to put me on pause and go and gather your materials. In the room, I just want to check that everybody's got anything. If you are watching us back via the internet, then on the right-hand side of your screen is a materials list. All the references there, the line drawing and everything. There's links to the materials. You can download those images and then you can use them for your painting. But I want to check that everybody in the room has got everything. So have we got in the room certainly a line drawing? We need the line drawing because that's kind of the most important part. Nice simple line drawing today. Nothing too complicated whatsoever. Then you should also have the photograph that I took the line drawing from, taken on a very bright sunny day that was very cold down on the bill. And then also, hopefully, you have a copy of the original painting that I've done. Now, please don't worry if your painting turns out differently to how this one looks. That's kind of the point of the exercise today. It should hopefully still look like a lighthouse and it should hopefully still have rocks in front of it. But the whole idea of today is that you experiment with the mixed media techniques that I'm going to share with you. So we are going to do a little bit of collage. We are going to do some watercolour ground. We are going to do some acrylic as well. And then we're going to put watercolours all over the top of that. And all in the time that we have today. Sounds like an impossible task, but it's really not. So have we all got, in the room, have we all got those? You should have 2 pieces of watercolour paper. One is going to be the piece that you do your painting on, which is this one here, and is a piece of Saunders Waterford. You can tell that it's the Saunders Waterford because it has the decal edge. So it has this beautiful, lovely kind of partly mould-made edge, and then 2 cut sides. That's the piece that you're going to create your painting on. And then the other piece of watercolour paper that you've got there is a piece of the SAA's practice paper. And that is, if I ask you to make a mark on the piece of paper or demonstrate something, then the piece of SAA practice paper, it's all good. Keep going. Gary kind of morphs in. The SAA practice paper is there for you to just test the skills out on first. It means that then you've got a little bit of a safety net before launching yourself on your final painting. If you don't want to use that, that's fine, but I would rather you had a piece of practice paper than you worrying about doing it on the actual finished painting itself. You should also have an elusive piece of paper, which looks like this. Now, this is actually going to be the star of the show today, along with some of the other materials. And this has several names. I call it silk tissue. It's sometimes called mulberry paper, but you can see that it's got fibres running through it. And this is going to form the basis of our rocks today. We're going to be tearing this up and gluing it on and regressing to being 5 years old, which is a marvellous place to be. And we'll be sticking that down later. You should have a selection of colours squeezed out. These are the SAA's own brand watercolour paints. You should have cerulean, cobalt violet, translucent grey, and alizarin crimson, because we do need a red lighthouse in there somewhere. There's going to be various other things that we use today as well. We're going to be using Bindex, which we're going to be using as an adhesive. In the room, you should have a tube at the end of every row, which you're just going to need to pass down. There should also be watercolour ground. Please don't worry, I'm going to explain what all these things do later on. We're using the Daniel Smith watercolour ground today, and we're going to be using some silver acrylic. This is all for your rocks. What else have we got? There's a lot of stuff. I like stuff, I have to say. What's not to like about putting stuff on a painting? Palette knife, a white biro. You're going to fall in love with the white biro later. I can absolutely promise you that. And then 3 different brushes. And it's kind of important from the start that you know the difference between these 3 brushes. So would you be kind enough to just grab hold of them for a second? So one of those brushes may look different to the others, and you need to kind of isolate that. Mine's got a blue handle, but I'm guessing that most of you in the room have got green handle. Blue or green handle you've probably got. That is your gluing brush. It's a ratty old brush that kind of needs retiring, but you're going to be using it for glue today. So please make sure that that is the brush you use for glue, and not the other 2. And these fabulous, fabulous things are the SAA's new imitation sable brush. I've been using these for 6 months now. They are phenomenal. They are a man-made hair, but they simulate sable. And they are just brilliant. So SAA have kindly said that we can work with them today so that you can get to play with them. If you are using them at home, let us know how you're getting on with them, because I think they're fantastic. If you are painting along at home, if you're joining us live today, please let us know how you're getting on. There's a little chat window there, which you are very welcome to participate in. Tell us where you are, tell us what you're up to, tell us what the weather's doing outside, particularly if you're in Dorset. Tell me if I'm going to get home tonight. Has everybody got everything pretty much? Yes? Marvellous. Should we get started? Okay, let's start with your piece of Saunders Waterford watercolour paper. May I suggest, if you're in the room, you stash almost everything else underneath your drawing board or on the floor or somewhere where it's not going to get in your way. And then you can keep a nice clean workspace. Now, there's lots of ways that you can use watercolour paper by stretching it or sticking it down to your board. I am a big fan of not doing any of those things, of actually leaving your piece of watercolour paper free, so that you can move it around, so that you can pick it up, so that you can bend it backwards and forwards and you can manipulate it. That way, because this is a piece of watercolour paper that is 100% cotton, you're allowing it to stretch and go back to its original form without anchoring it down. It's also, you probably might realise, £200, 425 gram, so a little bit heavier than standard, because we are going to ask a lot of this piece of paper today. We're going to be sticking things, mushing things into the surface, chucking stuff at it, and the poor piece of paper is going to need to be able to stand up to all of those things. So we're going to need that to start with. You're also going to need your line drawing, and you are going to need your piece of trace down. So this. I do love that the people in the room who've been to my workshops before are going, yeah, we've got it, it's all good. So we'll talk about the trace down in a second. The first thing we need to do is talk about how we're going to get our line drawing onto our watercolour paper. So what I'd like you to do at first, it's very tempting to put your line drawing slap bang in the middle of your piece of watercolour paper. But I'm going to actually suggest that you move it ever so slightly up and ever so slightly to the left, so that the face of your lighthouse has room to kind of look out to sea. It's the same when you do animal portraits. Leave some space in front of your subject so that it's not kind of falling out of the edge. It doesn't need an awful lot, so if I kind of recenter it, so in the middle it would be there, but I'm pushing it up ever so slightly and to the left ever so slightly. Also, because we are going to be discussing rocks today and not necessarily sky. So the next thing to do is to find some masking tape and then stick it about your person. Because what you want to do is you're not putting the glue onto your fabric. What you're doing is pulling off any lint from your fabric, or in my case, dog hair, onto this piece of masking tape. And then I'm going to tear it in two and anchor my line drawing down at the top like a hinge, so that I can lift up my line drawing and put it down as I want to. Okay. Then your piece of trace down. So trace down is a little bit like old-fashioned carbon paper, but it differs from carbon paper because carbon paper, do you remember carbon paper that you used to put in a typewriter? Kids at home will be going, what's that? What's a typewriter? So carbon paper used to be wax-based. So it meant that you couldn't erase it, you couldn't alter it in any way. Trace down is different because it is graphite-based. So if for some reason you made a mistake or you wanted to move something or alter something, it means that you can erase it really easily. And the trick is dark side down. And I in no way, shape or form want to patronise you, but check. Please do check. So you can lift up your hinged line drawing and you can literally just slide your trace down underneath, making sure it's dark side down. Okay? Brilliant. Now there's lots of ways that you can do the transfer as well. We've got a relatively simple drawing today. Sometimes I recommend that we use a biro to do the transfer. Today we can just use a pencil, that's fine. One of the things you are going to need to check is the amount of pressure that you're making. So when we make our way around our line drawing, redrawing it so that it pushes through the trace down and produces graphite underneath, you are going to want to check that it comes out okay. Don't do all of it and then check, only to find out that you didn't press hard enough. So it's very easy. Just to start with, I'm going to do one of the lines coming down here, and then I'm going to lift up my trace down and just check that I've got a line that's come out. And make your way around your drawing, copying what I have set out. You may notice that some of the lines, in fact an awful lot of the lines, are broken. And by that I mean there's dots and dashes. May I suggest that you stick to those dots and dashes rather than trying to join them up, so that you've got a little bit of freedom when you come to paint it, so you're not painting up to the lines. That's effectively what I'm suggesting. So if you want to get started on transferring your drawing, I'm going to do the same. And for the audience at home, I'm going to describe what I'm drawing and why it's going to be important in the painting as we go. Let's start with the main body of the lighthouse. Very distinctive lighthouse, Portland Bill, because it is this amazing red and white. And we're going to have that red band at the bottom, which is going to be the focus of our painting. Going to have a window to that side, and we've got a window in the middle. Let's just, don't forget to check that it's coming through, which it is. Fabulous. Let's put the outside of that window in, coming across, and one of the first things we're going to put in at the top of the bill is this kind of rim in the architecture, which houses the platform that they use to maintain the light, and that's what these railings are up here. So they go round in a slight curve because it is a cylindrical object. So we'll get that in. Let's just have a check. Yes, that's fine. Then we're going to put the main light in at the top and the enormous pane of glass that's at the front, which has got this incredible cross-hatching on, which holds the glass together. Now you may notice as well that I haven't put in solid lines for the cross-hatching, so that it's just essence of window rather than an architectural plan. Let's pop that in to that side. That's looking okay. So the top of the structure. If you're unsure of what anything is, you can either refer back to the colour photograph, or you can refer to the original painting that I did, whichever you find easiest. Pop that in, and then also going to pop in the, I was going to say stairs, but they're not stairs, the steps, the metal steps that go right up to the top of the lighthouse. Now the chances are, when you put your sky in, if you're going to be quite daring with your sky, you might lose that metal work that's going around the side. But we're going to take care of that later, so don't worry about it too much. Let's check what I've got. That's looking okay. And I'm going to put my rock shapes in. Now the rocks that we're painting today are going to be quite experimental, and I'm not going to worry too much about the shape of them, because my collage materials and some of the other things that we're going to be using may dictate the shape rather than my drawing. But I've got to put something in down here, so I may as well start with a few lines. Put mine in. I think these are the last few lines I need to draw. Coming across. I think that line actually belongs to a big rock at the bottom. Let's just have a quick look back at my original. Yes, my original, you can see the difference between the line drawing and the way that the rocks form themselves in the actual painting themselves. I've got a line coming across here that I actually got rid of. So it doesn't really matter. They're still going to look like rocks. Is that everything? Check that I've got everything in. Now, if you really, really, really want a safety net, if you're not that confident with your drawing and you're not that confident with throwing colour at a piece of paper only to find that your drawing has disappeared, one little trick is to put a pencil mark around each corner of your line drawing, so that if something happens, if it all goes terribly pear-shaped and you need to redraw it, you can line it up perfectly and pop your drawing back over the top of whatever it is you've painted, and your lighthouse and your rocks and everything will be in the right place. So when you're confident that you've got everything, you can unpeel the line drawing, and I doubt that you'll need that again, so you can probably stash it under your drawing board with your trace down. And the next thing you're going to need is your putty rubber. So get your drawings to a stage when everything is on there. And your putty rubber you're not going to need an awful lot of. We've just got a bit of cleaning up to do. How are we doing in the room? All right? Good, 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 good. That's all right, you don't have to be quiet. It's fine. Most people at home can't hear you anyway. How are you getting on at home? If you're following along, let us know how it's going. Let us know if you've got your line drawing down and if you're excited about the next bit. All right? So stash that away. And then, like I said, you're going to need your putty eraser next, which might be, for those of you in the room, might be at the bottom of your pot. Now, one thing that happens when you use trace down is that you do tend to get scuff marks. It's just where your hand has knocked the bottom of the trace down against the watercolour paper. And a putty rubber will erase those marks really cleanly. So the first thing you can do is to just very lightly swipe the putty eraser over the top of your drawing to clean it up. And then there's probably a good chance that you're going to need to do a little bit more pencil work to make sure you know exactly where certain elements are. Because sometimes the trace down, it's not as clear as it could be. So I'm going to use my pencil back over the lines that I have drawn. It's also a really good opportunity to kind of neaten things up, to make sure that you understand exactly where the windows are. Now, we're not into architectural planning. It doesn't have to be the world's most perfect lighthouse. It's just got to look like a lighthouse. But I always like putting the pencil back in when I've removed the trace down, because also it kind of helps me orient my way around my painting as well, so that I can understand where the windows are, where the railings are, etc. But if you've got a window in a different place, that's fine. No one's going to tell you otherwise. I'm going to shade my windows in so that I'm absolutely sure that I know where they are. Let's do this one in the middle. Put that in. Putty eraser as well, it has this fabulous hidden trick that if you've put your pencil line in the correct place but it's a bit too dark, putty eraser, tap it over the surface and you can just pick enough graphite off to lighten it. Let's put those railings in because that's the kind of tricky bit, the fiddly bit at the top. Buildings tend to frighten people painting because I think everybody thinks they have to be fantastically accurate, but you'll be surprised you don't need architectural skills to make a building look like a building. It's finding the shapes that describe it rather than every last nail, brick, roof tile, whatever it is. Getting that bit down. Oh, I'm being far too careful this morning. Getting that over the top. Getting those cross-hatching marks in. Let's get those in a little bit more accurately. I was a bit laissez-faire with those this morning. Get the railings in. How are we doing in the room, all right? Are you kind of getting to grips with it as a building a little bit more? Understanding where stuff is? What's going on down here? So we have two lines coming down, and we have those two lines going over the top, and then those kind of handrails radiate around. That's better. And then my rocks very quickly, I'm going to break up a little bit more as well with a few more scribbles, because I just know when we get to the tissue, they're going to change shape anyway. Get that in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a quick walk around the room to see how people are getting on. Like I said, please do share with us how you're getting on. And don't forget that the SAA has a fabulous page on social media, so Facebook, so you can share your kind of works in progress with us. I'd love to see them because I hardly ever get to see what you guys create at home. So take a photo, post it up there. Everybody's really kind in that group, so no one's going to judge your painting. They're just going to be impressed that you've done it. Right, how are we doing in the room? All right? That's okay. So, where's my putty eraser gone? Is it not working? Sometimes you do have to be quite brutal with it. Let's give you... Oh, there is one that... will you be surprised, actually? It looks dirty, but what it's done is kind of pick the graphite off, so you can always tear a new edge and then use that, because a larger piece is easier. Are you getting on all right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Well done. Very good. Very good. It's like you've been before. Surprise. Shock, 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 shock. Okay, brilliant. Very good. Trying not to feed back. I'm going to peer at Caroline's. You all right?
Yeah, fine.
Excellent. How are we doing over there? Very good. I am leaving that off. It's so on the colour photograph, you may notice in the red part of the lighthouse, there's a shape on the right-hand side, and it's actually the foghorn. It's actually where the noise comes out of it. But to draw it accurately, and it doesn't really matter, you know, it's no less a lighthouse if you leave it off. If we were counting window panes, then maybe. But yeah, I left it out. Artistic license. I'm very good at it. Fabulous. Very good. How are we doing here? Good? Are we confident? Ish. Ish. Are we confident so far? That's a different question, isn't it?
We were just talking about the merits of tracing.
Tracing.
Trace, or do you freehand draw?
So the question in the room is, do I always trace or do I do it freehand? And the answer is it depends. I do both. It depends on what skill it is I'm trying to advance. If I'm trying to advance my drawing skills, then I will do it freehand. If I'm trying to advance my painting skills, my patience runs out at the drawing. So what I do is either use simplified line drawings or I will trace from photographs, which I know is the 8th deadly painting sin. But I took the photograph, so I get to trace it. And yeah, it means that I just get to the painting bit quicker. There is no right or wrong. Don't ever let anybody tell you that tracing is a bad thing. It was good enough for the Renaissance. It's good enough for us. All of those things. How are we doing? Good, very good indeed. How are we doing in the back row? Marvellous. Okay, these are good. We have a question. Kat, hello Kat. Yes, absolutely. Normal tissue paper will do. The reason that we're using the silk tissue is because it's got little fibres in it. And what the fibres will do is hang on to some of the colour and they'll kind of make the cracks and fissures in the rock. So what you can do if you've got ordinary tissue at home, when we place the tissue on, and I think that's the thing that we're going to do next, if you just ever so slightly scrunch up your tissue, then you'll get those cracks and fissures come out of it. And that's not a sort of lesser technique, that's just a different technique. But that's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it, because I'm sure there are other people at home that might wonder. Are we good? Right. Let's get to the bit where we tear up paper. Now, everyone's itching in the room. One of the ways that I work is I am a watercolourist at heart, but I find for my own benefit that watercolour has limitations. I find that if you're going to paint in watercolours, there kind of is a way that you should and shouldn't lay them down. Admittedly, I try to break all those rules at any given opportunity, but if you want them to be successful, sometimes when you're trying to create textures with watercolour and you need quite a heavy looking texture, it's very easy to overpaint, isn't it? It's very easy to add layer after layer after layer after layer and then suddenly go, oh, I've overpainted it. So my way around it is to be a mixed media painter, in that I will lay lots of textures and kind of special effects and all sorts of things down on the paper first, so that when I come to the watercolour, I can drop the watercolour in and I don't have to mess about with it too much. That's not the right way of doing it. It's not the wrong way of doing it. It's just the way that I do it. So one of the things that we are going to experiment with today is literally the way that I would put something on, in what particular order I would do it in. And then I encourage everybody, you watching at home, everybody in the room, to go home and break all those rules, because that's part of painting, isn't it? So we are going to lay some collage materials down. We are going to paint over the top with textures, and then over lunchtime, those textures are going to be allowed to dry so that when we come back, we can drop the colour in and ta-da! No one believes me. I don't know what they mean. So the first thing is to find your sheet of silk tissue. And you are going to make rock shapes out of this. Of course you are. That's what everyone wants to do on a Friday, isn't it? Make rock shapes out of tissue paper. Now you will notice what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it over the top of a coloured piece of paper for the timing, so you can see the paper a little more easily. You will find that if you tear this silk tissue down there, you get lots of lovely fibrous edges. Can you see those? So that when we stick them down in a minute, you'll get all these lovely bits of fibre that will cling on to the colour and the textures and everything that we put on, and create some interesting effects. When you tear the paper dry, it is very hit and miss. It's going to go the way it wants to go. So part of me wants to encourage you to tear it dry, but I know that that is the kind of thing that makes you reach for the brown paper bag and try to breathe in it very heavily, isn't it? So there is another way of doing it. And the other way of doing it is to wet the edge. So what you can do is take a fine brush and draw a line of water. I'll put my hand underneath it so that you can see it. Coming down there. Let that water soak in, and then you'll find that the paper pulls apart much more easily. So you can actually lay your silk tissue over the top, because look at that, it's slightly translucent, and you can draw out the shapes with a wet brush so that they tear correctly. Or you can do what I'm going to do, is to just tear them up. Because some people like to have the control of having the exact right shape, and some people like me aren't bothered about it. The choice is up to you. But what I am going to do is give myself options. So for example, I am not necessarily going to worry too much about keeping to my plan that I drew out. I'm lucky that this one happens to be relatively square. But if I've then got a bit that's left over that I think, oh, that's quite an interesting bit, so I'll stick that down somewhere else, so that the tissue paper is dictating the rock shapes. Now, the good thing about the Isle of Portland, which is the bit that sticks out off of Weymouth, for any of you that know Dorset, is that the rock structure, the rocks break up into very square shapes. So you'll be able to create them quite easily. So may I suggest you have a lovely fun 5 minutes tearing it up and laying your bits of tissue on here to create rock shapes. I'm going to do that very thing. And may I also suggest that you have more bits of tissue than you might necessarily need, so that then if I happen to waft past and I waft it off your table, you're not searching for it. And also because it might be that you change your mind halfway through sticking it on. There's something terribly satisfying as well about tearing up bits of paper. A very good question. So the question in the room was, do you have any of them overlapping? I would say yes, because it's next to impossible for that not to happen. You will find when we stick them down, they will move. So have some overlapping, some not overlapping. But I think my main bit of advice is not to worry about it too much. To just revert to being a 5-year-old, tear bits of paper up, and then when you go home, they go, ooh, what marvellous technique did you learn today? You can go, well, we tore some paper up and stuck it on. Right, a bit more from me. And just lay it on and create some nice patterns and be in your happy place. Because I am always in my happy place when I am sticking bits of paper down. And be more adventurous than I've been. Don't stick to my plan. If you want more rocks, put more rocks in. And with your silk tissue, if you started a new sheet, don't chuck any of it away. Keep all the spare parts, because they're really useful. And actually, you might want to add some later. If we have time later today, we might do some kind of additional bits of collage. Right, what do I like and what don't I like? I'm not wild about that one that's on down there. I might turn that up the other way. Gary needs to shout no faffing at me. Stop faffing. Right, tear up your little bits of tissue. I'm just going to have a quick drink before I cough. How are we doing? It's great for any pent-up anger, this technique as well. Ripping it up. And yes, if you're using ordinary tissue, just tear it into some rough shapes. The water technique still applies with ordinary tissue. You can still wet a line, and then you'll find that it separates much more easily. But I quite like tearing it dry. Sorry. I have got one extra bit that's come down long, just because I kind of have felt like it. I'm not standing not near for a reason. It's just because my microphone is starting to feed back. So yes, you can do all of the rocks. Some of the rocks kind of work intuitively. That's my piece of advice, which isn't helpful, but you know what I mean. If you decide that you don't want a rock in a particular place, then do that thing. Caroline, are you all right in the corner? Having a ripping time? Good. Loaded with sarcasm. Oh, good. I'm trying not to waft as I move past, because there's nothing more frustrating than watching your bits of tissue. You've got a hairy rock. So not an answer to that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a good thing. You can overlap them, not overlap. Honestly, by the time you've got everything else that we're going to put on the piece of paper, overlapping them is going to be the least of your concerns. That's it. Very good. Excellent. Well, you're asking the woman that will stick loads of bits of collage down all day long, so I don't think there can be too many bits. If you like the bits, go with the bits. If you don't like them, take them away. It's genuinely, it's not going to matter at all. Not an iota.
More interesting to leave gaps.
You can leave gaps, yes. You could have some, no, because actually by the time that we get the textures on and you've let your colour run down the page and do all sorts, yeah, you can see that the majority of colour that's going on in the bottom of my painting, I've actually just allowed to fall off the edge of the paper. Yeah, can do. Be happy with your choice, which is very easy for an artist to say, isn't it? No, that's good. That's good, yeah. My only piece of advice to you actually would be, can you see that it ends in a very straight line at the bottom? Break it up a little bit, so kind of move one down or move one up, or just something to break up that very formal line at the bottom. But it really doesn't matter. Are we good? Are we there? Marvellous. See, it's still not scary, is it? You wait till we chuck paint at it. Right, the next technique is actually sticking these down. Now, I'm going to teach you the way that I attach collage materials. Again, that's not the only way of attaching collage materials. It's just the way that I find that works. You are going to need your paper plate. May I suggest as well that you don't waft too much now that we have... So you need your paper plate. You're going to need some Bindex squeezed out on it, but there is one thing that I just want to talk to you about before you open the tube of Bindex. Bindex is a Pebeo product. It's actually a little bit like acrylic paint with the colour taken away from it. So it's more like a medium, but it does make a fantastic adhesive. And the reason that I use it rather than PVA glue is because I find PVA glue difficult to get the right consistency. PVA glue on its own is too plastic-like, and it will repel the watercolour quite severely. So then what you need to do is to mix it with water, and then if you over-mix it with water, then it doesn't stick. And you can be doing this sort of yo-yo thing of adding water and adding PVA. Bindex is the right consistency straight out of the tube, and it dries far faster. Now, the problem with the Bindex tube is because it's got the nozzle at the bottom, you will open the lid and it will go bleh instantly. So may I suggest that you remove the lid, take the plate to the Bindex, and then very lightly squeeze. And we're playing past the parcel in the room. So everybody on the end of the row has got the tube of Bindex. May I suggest that you put the lid on it before you pass it along, or keep it upside down. Did it? They just, yeah. It's because the weight of the product in the tube means it just falls out the nozzle. The quantity to squeeze out is about that. Yeah, a small tablespoon, a large teaspoon. The chances are that you might, it depends on the quantity. Yes, yeah, very much so. About that. About that, whatever that equates to. It does have an interesting smell, doesn't it? You're like me, you have to literally take the lid off and sniff it. And you're also going to need your glue brush. Do you remember we talked about the glue brush? Please don't let it be your imitation sable brushes. It doesn't matter what size it is, it makes no odds. You're going to need water, and you're going to need a piece of the lower quality kitchen roll, so the white kitchen roll. We'll talk more about kitchen roll later, because I have very particular kitchen roll requirements. Yes, unfortunately, there is a particular brand. But this one doesn't matter. This is your run-of-the-mill, and this is just for blotting. So if you don't mind, I'm going to demonstrate it first, and then you can stick them down. Now, you can remove everything from your plan and then put all the glue down and do it that way, or you can do it a bit at a time. I'm a big fan of literally just taking it all away, because then you're not being too precious about it all. However, I do realise that you've gone, well, I've just torn it into the right shape. How am I supposed to know where it is? So place them wherever you find most convenient. You're going to wet your brush. It doesn't need to have any water on it at all, because the Bindex is the right consistency. And then there's kind of a particular way of doing this, and I know it sounds bizarre, but I will explain it. You need to place Bindex onto your watercolour paper. It doesn't have to be perfect, it can be scrubbed on. You then take your piece of silk tissue, you lay it into the glue, and then a tiny bit of water onto your brush just to make sure that it moves, and the Bindex needs to go back over the top. This produces a Bindex sandwich. And the reason for this is that then your collage materials, and it doesn't matter what collage materials you are using, will then lay completely flat on the surface. However, you end up with something that I like to describe as a glue halo. So you end up with your collage material stuck down, and then see if I can get it to show in the... Can you see the shine on it? Now that is going to repel your watercolour. Admittedly, we're going to do 10 other things to this before watercolour gets anywhere near it. But let's start as we mean to go on. So what you need to do is to wash your brush out and then pop some water around the shape and use the kitchen roll to blot away any excess Bindex. And then what should happen is, can you see now the shine is gone? So I know that there's going to be no glue halo when I put it down. Now you can put Bindex over everything, shove your tissue on, Bindex over the top, do the glue halo, or you can do it a piece at a time, however works best for you. But get your collage materials on. Don't worry if they crinkle up, don't worry if they've got rough edges, don't worry about any of that stuff, because it's all going to add to the texture of the rock. It does not matter which side down the silk tissue is. It's the same both sides. Really good question. Thank you. You will find that gaps occur naturally. Again, I really wouldn't worry about it. So let's recap that for the purposes of everybody at home. So I've got my Bindex. I'm laying my Bindex down. I have no idea which bit that was, so we'll make it this bit. Sticking the silk tissue down, little bit of water back on my brush into the Bindex. Bindex goes on. As you can see, it's done with huge amounts of care and attention. Not shoving it on at all. Water around and about, and a bit of blotting. You will see very clearly where the Bindex is when you do it. It's much harder to describe than it is to do. Let's finish off the shapes that I've created. I've forgotten where I decided to put them now. Oh, what am I doing? Bindex first, Ali. Concentrate. Get the Bindex on. Pop the bit of collage material down. Wet the brush back into the Bindex and gluing it down. And this technique of laying collage materials down in a Bindex sandwich, you will find will work for pretty much any collage material. And what it does is stop it buckling on the paper, because you're effectively soaking it front and back. And then that water around the edge helps to just keep track of how repellent the glue is. Now, because we're working with white silk tissue paper today, there may come a point where it starts to disappear. You're just going to have to trust it. It will help you out. Let's use that bit. Doesn't matter if you've got fluffy bits. You want the fluffy bits. You want it to look like rock. And like I said, we're going to do lots of other things to this. One massive advantage of silk tissue is that, of course, you can still see your line drawing underneath it. So you still have got a bit of a guide as to where the shapes need to be. Last few bits. Where did I get to? One in there. I think that was that one. And you can leave gaps or not leave gaps. It genuinely doesn't matter. I think I've just put a bit of glue in my sky. Never mind, block that off, it'd be fine. It can be a cloud. Bindex over the top. Bit of water. In fact, I would kind of guess that the more careful you are, the less effective it is. I personally think if you slap it on and don't worry about it too much, then you'll end up with a much more spontaneous painting anyway. Do I want that bit there? Oh yeah, let's go for it. Bit of silk tissue. Let's do another bit underneath it, actually. Let's put another one in here because I've got one bit left. That'll do the job, that's better. Little bit more Bindex. And the last little bit of water. If you find that your paper is starting to bulge a little bit, you can sort of see it on mine where we're putting lots of glue and water down. Don't worry, this Saunders Waterford paper will be very kind to you. You can do all kinds of things to Saunders Waterford and it will come back flat again. Not sticking it down is the key. Then you're allowing it room to breathe. Right, I'm going to come around and see how you guys are doing. How are you getting on at home? How's it going? Is the collage going down all right? Let us know. Right, how are we doing? How's it going over here?
Too many bits of paper.
Too many bits of paper. You'll end up with bits stuck to you, and in my house, usually stuck to the dog. All good, yeah, lovely. Like I said, please don't worry about it too much. Ooh, very nice. Like it. You can actually use kitchen roll for this as well, instead of silk tissue. You'll never look at collage materials in the same way ever again. Any kitchen roll will do for this bit. White one, probably. It's like they take the mickey out of my kitchen roll fetish, isn't it? How are we doing? Yeah, good. Whack it on, don't worry about it. What this is hopefully going to create for you is a really interesting textured foreground for your lighthouse. It would be still a lovely painting if we just painted the lighthouse and we put a dramatic sky in and all those kind of things, but it's too good an opportunity to start experimenting with materials to create texture, and this is kind of why we're doing it today. Yeah, looking good. Yeah, don't be too careful. Lovely, very good indeed. That's it. Excellent. Yeah. No, I know. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, to be honest. Sometimes I think it's a good thing that you can't see where you've been, because then you stop worrying about it, don't you? Because it is tempting to be over-precious with it, isn't it? How are we doing?
I don't know, not being too neat.
We don't want neat. I don't paint neat. Good. Yeah, nearly there. Very good indeed. It's kind of like a surprise, really, because you're not going to see the tissue until you start painting. I'll give you a couple more minutes just to catch up with the collage. That's it. Don't worry if you get the glue on your hands. There's nothing that you need to worry about in the glue at all. Very safe to use. I use it a lot in my children's workshops. It's a really good product. And of course you can mix things like Brusho with it to turn Brusho into an acrylic paint. You can mix Pearlex powders in with it to turn Pearlex into an acrylic paint. It's an incredibly versatile product. Bit of a cure-all. We like a product that does more than one thing. How are we doing? Not quite in hysterical habdabs yet, but getting there. Gluing furiously in the room. Bits of tissue flying all over the place. Everybody's concentrating. It's palpable, isn't it? Brilliant. And then when you've finished with your gluing brush, give it a fantastically good wash out. Give it a really good swish about. Clean it up on your kitchen roll to make sure that you've got all the glue out of it. Give it a couple of passes is probably a good idea. I tend to keep an old retired brush just for gluing, and that way if I forget and the glue stays on it, it's not the end of the world. That's it, and then pop it to one side. Right. Are we going to use any more silk tissue? You might do at the end, but I doubt it. I doubt it very much. One of the great things about this technique is that you can get to right to the end of your painting and still add more tissue over the top. Because it dries translucent, you can get rid of areas that you think are too strong. Excuse me. And you can add extra textures at the end if you think that it's not enough. Just deafen Gary. Yes.
Does it keep it as it is the powder, or does it dissolve the powder into the colour?
Really good question. Oh, so the question in the room was, if you mix Bindex with Brusho, does it keep it in its kind of crystal form, or does it dissolve it? And the answer is, it depends. So if you over mix it, so if you sort of stirred it to oblivion, the water content of the Bindex will dissolve the Brusho crystals. If you do it with something like a palette knife, for example, so you might have some Bindex squeezed out onto the plate and tap a few Brusho crystals into it and literally pick up a palette knife, scoop that up and swipe it, they'll stay where they're put. They might blend out a little bit during the drying process, but they will stay looking texturized. So yeah, it's the kind of the, yeah, it's all in the mixing. Like so many things in art, isn't it? It's all in the mixing. Okay, are we good to carry on? Got our collage down? Right, watercolor ground. This is just my, I can't get across to you how much this is my favorite product in the whole world. Now, I don't know if you've come across it before. Has anyone in the room used watercolor ground before? Yes, a few. I know some of you know that it is my favorite thing. This was designed to be able to prime surfaces to be able to paint them in watercolors. And when I say surfaces, I mean anything. So plastic, metal, glass, wood. You can go onto the SAA's YouTube channel and you can see 2 or 3 videos about its use and how it's done. I've used it in demonstrations before. It's incredibly versatile. Now, of course, lots of people say, well, why are you using it on watercolor paper? And we're using it on watercolor paper today to be able to add a texture back into our painting, but it still work like a ground for watercolor. So there are lots of different textures that you can add underneath watercolor paint, but they all have a very different effect. So I'm sure a lot of you know gesso. Gesso is a product that's used under watercolor a lot. Well, gesso partly repels watercolor. Kind of keeps some of it, you can stain it with watercolor, but then it repels anything that sits on the surface. Now, that might be the effect that you want, but it might also push the color and make the color kind of swim on the surface when you don't want it to. Now, watercolor ground accepts watercolor, And what's interesting about watercolour ground is that you can play around with its application to determine how absorbent it is. So, for example, if you wanted an incredibly absorbent ground, you would put it on with a sponge roller in a very light coating, and you'd allow it to dry for 72 hours between each coat, and you'd build it up, and that way you'd be able to, it's not going to be exactly like watercolour paper, but it's certainly going to accept the watercolour. So you can paint on jam jars and pieces of slate and roof tiles and all sorts of things with it. It also comes in, that we're using white today, but it comes in transparent, so that you can retain the look of whatever it is you're painting on. So I know that on the SAA's channel, I've done a demonstration before on a piece of wood, and I've used transparent watercolour ground and then painted my subject on top, so it still looks like a piece of wood, but I've painted with watercolours. I haven't had to resort to using acrylics. It comes in black, it comes in buff titanium, and it comes in pearlescent white and pearlescent gold, which is just too lovely. And, you know, a bit of bling. We always love a bit of bling. Now, you can, like I said, vary the drying time between coats, and you can vary the tool that you apply it with. Now, of course, we don't have 72 hours to allow it to dry in between coats today, so we're going to use it slightly differently. We're actually going to use it with a palette knife, and we are going to apply it, don't worry, I'm going to show you. We're going to apply it over the top of our collage material where we want our rocks to look textured but still accept the watercolour. Now, I use it a lot over collage materials that I actually want to hide. So if I've got a line of text in collage materials, and that's something that I do an awful lot, and I just want a little bit of the word to show through, I will swipe watercolour ground over the top of it and then just scrape it back where the words that I want to show can be seen. And then it becomes less like, here's a piece of collage, and a little bit more subtle. So you're kind of blending it in with the background. And of course, today, we still want our rocks to be able to accept watercolour and to still look textured, but we don't necessarily want everything to repel the watercolour and then have trouble with getting the colour on the rocks in the first place. There's other things that we're going to do to them, but you know, I couldn't stop at one medium, could I? I had to use two today. So on your tables, at the end of every row, you should have a pot of watercolour ground, and you should also have a teaspoon. Because rather than trying to get it onto your paper plate and by pouring it out, then a teaspoon is the way forward. Now, you're all going to ask me how much you need, aren't you? I don't know, is the answer. Start with a teaspoonful, and then we'll worry about the rest later. If you really want to be good about it, then just pass your teaspoon down the row as well. It's entirely up to you. It goes a long way, a pot of that stuff as well. I mean, I get through it in shed loads. I kind of need a vat of watercolour ground. But yeah, a good old-fashioned dollop is the way forward. It's like a cookery class in here today. Question, right, while you're doing your watercolour ground thing, I'll answer questions. What question have we got, Gary?
Amanda was just going, she wants to know where she can get silk or silk tissue paper from without mentioning any competitors.
Without mentioning any competitors whatsoever, do a small search through your favourite search engine, Amanda. It is relatively easy to find, certain with more craft-based companies. You can try searching for silk tissue. You can also try searching for mulberry paper, because sometimes mulberry paper is how it's described. I know that the SAA are actually looking into getting some textured papers, so it might be a watch this space kind of entity. But Amanda, it's also, I want to say hello, because thank you for joining us, because I know that you were going to miss the start of it, but hello, nice to see you. Right, are we good? Have we dolloped? Yes.
This seems quite runny compared to, is that okay?
Compared to, I think it's never bothered me before. You do tend to get different consistencies as it dries out, and actually the different consistencies of watercolour ground can produce different effects. For today's, it doesn't matter. It won't matter at all, because one of the first things you're going to do is push it into the paper, so that's okay. Okay, are we good? Are we good? Right, so you're going to need your palette knife. Now, I've been quite specific today because I like pointy palette knives, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter what size palette knife you have either. Just a palette knife. It doesn't really matter if you've got plastic or metal. You get people that prefer plastic ones and you get people that prefer metal ones. It genuinely, it makes no odds. How you load your palette knife, however, is going to matter. Now, the idea of this is you're going to put some of the watercolour ground, not all over everything, just in places on our rocks to start to build up the texture. And there's two ways that you can do that. You can push the watercolour ground into the surface so that you get a smooth area, or you can use the back of the palette knife to kind of lift off to create that, what's that in, is it royal icing? Where you create snow, like I know. Never iced a cake in my life. My mum's at home laughing right now. Also, don't forget that you've got the edge of your palette knife to create a hard line if you want to. So if you've got a rock that's actually got a top to it, use that line to kind of pull down. I'll show you exactly what I mean. So I tend to put the back of my palette knife into the watercolour ground rather than shoving the whole thing in. So I use it kind of flat facing the ceiling. And then can you see that there we go. The back of my palette knife is nicely coated. Don't be shy with it. Don't be nice to it. It will get the better of you. Wrestle it to the ground, okay? And I'm going to start off up here by very lightly dragging the watercolour ground across the surface. Now, how well are you seeing that in? Okay, so let's just pick it up. So you can see, so can you see it's not over everything and it does hit and miss. I'll bring it round so that everyone in the room can see. And then you get kind of nice textured bits. You're going to get bits where the watercolour falls onto the collage material. So you remember you were saying to me, shall I leave gaps? Really not going to matter now, is it? Because it's going to be very dependent on where your watercolour ground ends up. So let's show you this line here. I want there to be quite a nice sharp edge, but as I bring it down, it's starting to kind of pull against the collage materials, and you'll start to find that this technique is fantastically addictive, and you will want to watercolour ground everything. But you do need to have a little bit of less is more going on in the back of your head. And then, of course, you can use the back of that palette knife to create those lovely peaks and troughs. If your collage material, if your silk tissue lifts, don't worry about it. That's all part of the texture. You want your rocks to look like they're in the foreground, don't you? And hopefully, can you see already? There we go. Ah, there we go. Look at that. Bit of raking light. Can you see how even without any colour on them whatsoever, those rocks are now popping forwards? In fact, we could put no colour on this at all, and those rocks would still look like they're ahead of the lighthouse. So get some colour on. Enjoy that process of allowing your palette knife to kind of skim over the surface. If any of you have ever done any wall plastering, this is where your skills come out. I really haven't at all. Okay. And what I'm going to do, which is going to flummox Gary at the back of the room, is I am just going to take this around for people to see. All right? So let's do a quick pass. So can you see it's very hit and miss? So I've got bits of the tissue paper showing, bits of the watercolour ground. In some areas, the watercolour ground is really smooth. In some areas, it's kind of really chunky, but textured always. And very random. Don't worry about it being random, because you do want this to look like a natural form, don't forget. You don't want it to look manufactured. These are rocks. Quite thick, yeah. Okay? You don't have to worry about it drying, because that's what's going to happen over lunchtime. We're going to work on other things. All right? And not careful. And don't rush this, you've got bags of time. Bags of time. Okay? All right. Yeah, you can always put another layer on. You don't have to wait for the collage materials to dry either. You can shove it on. Okay? That's it. Try to, wherever you put the watercolour ground, try to sort of attach it to an edge. Don't just put it as a little island in the middle of anything. Kind of put it, yeah, exactly as you've done. Nicely attached to an edge. Oh, is it not well? Yes, I will find you mine with pleasure. I will even clean it up for you before I give it to you. Yes, yours has got a nasty dent in it, hasn't it? There we go.
Thank you very much.
No problem at all. Are we okay in the corner?
I think so, yeah. You haven't gone to the bottom of the page.
No, I haven't gone to the bottom of the page because we're going to run the colour down to the bottom of the page so that we've got... Are you all right? You look befuddled.
I was just wondering if you do a little bit there. I will.
Yeah, whack it on. Whack it on. Good stuff. How are we doing in the back row?
All right, have we got enough on, do you think?
Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks good. Well, it's different. It's definitely different. Let's get that on. No, not at all. In fact, the more random, the better. Because actually, you want your rocks to look... You don't want them all to be uniform, do you, at all? You want them to be quite random. Okay. Now, when you have put the watercolour ground onto your main painting, what I would like you to do as well is to find your scrap bit of watercolour paper and pop some on there too. Because later on, it may come to pass that you want to practice some of the watercolour techniques, some of the rock techniques on a scrap first. So you might as well have some watercolour ground down. Oh, let's find a palette knife. Ali, don't be lazy. Okay, let's use one of those. Right, I'm going to do the same myself. So I'm going to just pop a little bit of the watercolour ground down on this bit of practice paper. So whilst you've been using the watercolour ground, has anyone in the room had any ideas for any projects with watercolour ground? Have you suddenly thought, actually, I could use it for that? Any thoughts? No, I bamboozled them all. Yes, definitely, yes. Watercolour ground can actually be spattered onto a surface. I won't do it. Because it's a dangerous weapon. Yes, you can load the end of a palette knife and flick it. Very satisfying technique. Yes, distinctly. Anything else anyone can think of as ideas? Because there'll be lots of people at home going, well, what do I do with it now?
I saw in a magazine someone had a piece of music.
Yes.
And then they put that watercolour ground in, and then the music notes were showing through the paper.
Yes, absolutely. So the idea in the room was to get a piece of music manuscript paper and to put the watercolour ground over the top of that. So you could use the transparent watercolour ground so that the music would show through if you wanted it all to show, or you could use the white watercolour ground to get little bits of it to come through. The thing that I do have to say, just because of the position that I'm in, is to just be careful with the copyright of the music manuscript paper. Music manuscript falls into a very grey area of copyright. So firstly, you have to be aware that it's not necessarily the person who wrote the song that owns the music manuscript. It is sometimes the publishing company. particularly if it's new. You also have to be aware that music manuscript paper also can fall into a category called ephemera. And ephemera are meant to be disposable items, so things like ticket stubs, postcards, postage stamps, all of that kind of thing, which doesn't fall under copyright because it is a found object, in other words. But that is a fantastically grey area. And for the most part, there'll be people out there that are going, oh, why do I need to worry about that? You only really need to worry about that if your work is then published. So if you made greetings cards out of it or you sell it, yeah. And copyright is such a widely talked about issue now in painting. And I wish that there was some easy set of rules that you could stick to, but it isn't that simple, unfortunately. I mean, I suppose there is an easy set of rules in the fact that unless you created it, it's not yours. But what you could do, it depends on your music skills, is none. Compose your own piece. But what you could do is get a piece of music stave, so just without any notes written on it, and they could be random. It'd still look like music, wouldn't it, because of the way that the shapes are formed. And then you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, anything with lyrics and all of those kind of things on comes under that heading, and it's a shame because there's lots of us that would love to be able to use that without the fear of being jumped on, because we do it with the best of intentions. But then I sort of see it. I've got friends who are songwriters. They wouldn't want to see their music used without kind of attribution. So, well, it is. Yeah, it's a really hard discussion, isn't it?
Is this water soluble? I mean, can I wash it off?
Yes, so the watercolour ground is water soluble when it's wet. But to be honest, what I do is wipe it in a bit of kitchen roll. Just wipe it in a bit of kitchen roll. Have we had any other ideas for the use of watercolour ground? What about brick walls? Brick walls. So if you had a brick wall in your painting, so for example, if you had kind of a climbing plant or something like that, you could lay the watercolour ground down, couldn't you, before you kind of paint the plant over the top. There's those kind of things. It's also really good for pressing other objects in. So for example, you could lay watercolour down flat, and then you could take a texture and push that into the watercolour ground to recreate the texture that you require. So things like moss is brilliant, or tree bark or something. I mean, what is better than painting a set of tree trunks, going on a bit of a nature ramble, coming back with bark, coating them in watercolour ground, pressing the bark that you've collected into that, and then you've got the actual texture and you haven't interfered with it too much. And that applies to kind of lots of things. And it's all part of the collage experience, isn't it? Because, I mean, let's face it, you could just have the piece of tree bark and you could coat it in transparent watercolour ground and just paint on it. But there's all those kind of things.
Could you, like, embed the tree bark if it was thin?
Very good question. Yes. So again, question in the room was, could you embed things into the watercolour ground? Yes, you absolutely can. What you might have to do is to pin them down. So I know on previous, I can't remember, Caroline, if you've been on one of my previous workshops where we've used dressmaking pins to pin down bits of kitchen roll. Well, if you use pins in a sort of entomological sense, you kind of put your watercolour ground down, put your leaf, tree bark, whatever it is, and then use a pin to pin it. That will hold it down long enough so that it's not popping up, because of course you can't, yes, so it sets, because of course you can't weight it down because then it will just be stuck. There's lots of artists that embed seed heads and things into watercolour ground, or stick the seed heads down and then swipe the watercolour ground over the top. So you can see why it's my favourite product, can't you? Because it's just the possibilities are fantastically endless. It's good stuff. And then, of course, you can get gold. You know, doesn't have to be boring old white. Okay, I'm going to pop that sample of watercolour ground down to one side and get my painting back. Hopefully, that's given you ideas for things to do in the future, because that's what painting's all about, isn't it? Coming to a workshop is all about learning stuff and then taking ownership of it, taking it home and making it suit your project. If you've got any ideas at home for using watercolour ground, tell us. Tell us, because we'd love to pass them on. And again, sharing our techniques is what it's all about. So may I suggest, if you've got any watercolour ground left over, just use your teaspoon, chuck it back in the pot for me. I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping here. Just because, let's not be wasteful. Our art materials are hard-earned. We want to be saving them. I tell you one thing that watercolour ground is brilliant for. You know those paintings that have got a glaring error in them? Tipex. Watercolour ground it out. Paint it in thin layers over the surface, so that horrible tree that you didn't like, or the boat that was in the wrong place, or the building that didn't work out, a little bit of watercolour ground over the top. Job's a good one. Watercolour ground. This one will dry white. There is a transparent one, which obviously dries transparent. My actual favourite combination is to use both. Because particularly over collage materials where I want the pattern to show or the text to show or whatever it is, what I like to do is streak the transparent over the top so that the lettering shows, and then use the white to fade the collage out into the background. So there's always kind of steps with this, aren't there? There's one way of using it, but actually if you combine more than one thing together, then you've got other uses for it too. So lots of ideas. Gary's waving at me. Right.
She says you can use it with mica powder.
Oh, using it with mica powder. Yes, you certainly can. And thank you, Suzanne. I should have remembered that, being a Pearlex fan myself. Yes, certainly. The transparent one, you can mix with any amount of pigments or mica powders and the like. And so you can then start to create your own versions of watercolour ground as well. So Pearlex is a perfect example. If you were, for example, this gives me a perfect opportunity, actually, when I've talked about this. If you wanted a bird that had kind of beautiful textured pink feathers, and you wanted the pink to be an undertone in your watercolour ground, you could mix the transparent with a flamingo pink Pearlex powder, and then you could use that palette knife technique to get the pattern of the feathers, couldn't you? And then part of the colour is already there, which brings me very beautifully, thank you Suzanne for that suggestion, onto a little bit of information for you. Hiding under here somewhere is Florence. I will put Florence in the camera for Gary to have a look at. So at the SAA this weekend, I'm terribly honoured because it's Ali Board Mixed Media Weekend. Ooh, get me. So if you have signed up to the newsletter via the website, saa.co.uk, you will have already received an email which went out yesterday, I believe, talking about some of the products that I like. If you are watching this live, you can go straight to the SAA's website, and it is Ali Board Weekend, and you will find a tutorial. Now, if you're watching on catch-up, this tutorial is going to stay on the website, and it's how to paint the delicious and delightful Florence, because this is also a very mixed media project. So we've got watercolours, we've got Brusho, we've got Pearlex, we've got Posca pens in here, literally a checklist of stuff. But there's a step-by-step tutorial which you are very welcome to follow on. And if you happen to do Florence, share it with me. I'd like to see what you come up with. So when you guys get home as well, you can have a bit of an extra tutorial. So Suzanne, thank you very much for that suggestion, because that is the perfect suggestion for that type of project. Okay, are we all good with the watercolour ground? Now, I couldn't possibly just let us use watercolour ground today. There had to be something else in there as well. And for that, we are going to use acrylic. Now, acrylic paint repels watercolour, okay? And that's a bit that you kind of have to get your head around before you use it. Wherever you put this, watercolour is not going to go. So I'm going to refer back to my painting, and you guys will be able to see quite clearly on your colour copy, or if not, please do have a glance up at the original, which is up in this corner. Can you see on the rocks? I'm sure you can probably recognise now where little bits of that silk tissue are coming through. So can you see the fibres now? They're kind of quite subtle and in the background, but you can spot them here and there, which are giving one layer of very subtle texture. You have then got another layer of texture, which is the watercolour ground, which are some of the very textured areas that have taken on the colour. So here, for example, where you've got the blues and the violets and lots of other things. But you've got a third layer of texture on there. And in this colour copy, it shows up as grey, but in the original, you'll see that it's actually silver, because obviously a colour copy can't pick up a metallic. I just thought with the sunlight glinting on those rocks, it would be a nice, quick, textural way of getting the shimmer of the sunlight on the stone itself. And what I've done is, and I'll show you, swiped the silver acrylic over the top of the watercolour ground and the Bindex and the collage materials in a similar way, and then that will, when it's dry, it will completely repel the colour. It's a bit of information to kind of get your head around to start with. But the reason that I'm saying it in a very measured way is because don't kind of put this everywhere, because your watercolour won't stick to it. Admittedly, there is a way back in that if you put it down in the wrong place, you could just put watercolour ground back over the top of it. That's not a problem, but let's do it as carefully as we can. I'll hand out the silver acrylic for you in just a second. You're not going to need an awful lot of it. This is actually a really beautiful silver colour in that it's sort of more pewter than it is silver, which I think is very good for our rocks. I'm going to use my palette knife in a similar way. I'm just going to have a drink before I cough again. Thank you, that's really kind. Deep breaths. Okay, so I have coated the silver acrylic on the back of my palette knife. That's probably a little bit too much. Probably needs a little bit less, so I can control that on my paper plate, a little bit of it. Now, you could do this when the watercolour ground is dry, in which case you'd get one type of texture, but we're going to mix it up a bit today. You're going to wipe this straight over the top of your wet watercolour ground, because then it will merge with the watercolour ground and you'll get some bits that take on the watercolour and some bits that repel the watercolour. So again, another level of texture. So I'm going to swipe mine over the top. It's actually quite warm in here. I don't know about you, my watercolour ground's nearly dry. So can you see? Hit and miss over the top. Again, I'll pass it around. Now, when you get this, A, because it's metallic, and B, because it looks so cool when you swipe it on, it's so tempting to then try to render it. Repoint your stones. But you do have to have a bit of restraint and a very light touch. So, if you're concerned that you're going to be too heavy-handed, go back to your practice piece. Everyone in the room has gone, yes, I'll be going to my practice piece first. Get your palette knife, and you will find it's down to pressure. So if you put the palette knife down and drag it, can you see that it pushes the acrylic into the surface? And actually what you want it to do is just very lightly hit and miss. Less is more. Because that looks manufactured, doesn't it? But those shapes look natural. So let's go back to my painting. Let's have a look at that. So again, taking my palette knife, loading up the back of it, and then looking to see where the highlights are. Now, one handy hint, if you find that the palette knife is a bit unwieldy, or if you find that it's not getting into the space, that it's too big, you can also do this with the back of a teaspoon. So you take your teaspoon, You load it up with acrylic, and then just in a small space, you can actually achieve the same thing just by very lightly dragging it over the surface. And again, I know there's a little kind of trigger gone off in my head right now that's gone, leave it alone, don't do too much. So it's like Gary's my own faffing monitor, isn't it, at the back of the room. Scary that I actually need that. Now, you may find that after you have done this, you start to lose the lines of where your rocks are. But don't worry, we're going to address that in the next pass. Right, stop faffing, Ali. So I'm going to pass some tubes of acrylic out. If, when you've squeezed some out, would you please just pass it on or pass it to the people who are behind you? So I'm going to pop it at the end of each row. So I'll pop one that side and one that side. When you guys are finished, can you pass it to the next row? And I'll pop one there and one there. And again, when you guys are finished, would you be kind enough to pass it backwards?
Ali, I have a question.
Nearly got me.
So Jack, who is watching for the first time,
Oh, hello, Jack. Thank you for tuning in.
he's very new.
Ah, welcome.
He wants to know, is there anything else he could use instead of silver acrylic? I'm guessing he doesn't have silver acrylic.
Okay. If you have acrylic, any colour of acrylic will do. You could even use white acrylic. Or what you could do is to use PVA glue or Bindex if you've got the Bindex, because both of those things will also repel the colour. There's lots of opportunities for you to be able to mix other things in with Bindex or the like we've talked about, like mica powders. I don't know what you've got, but acrylic paint is not the kind of be all and end all. You don't have to use that. You just need to choose something that dries to a plasticized finish. And actually that can be things like wood glue or emulsion paint. If you've got household emulsion paint at home, those tester pots that you never know what to do with, they might do the job as well. What else can I think of? You can even do things like sticking silver foil down, because that will have the same effect. That will repel the colour. So hopefully that gives you a few options of things that you can use. Thanks ever so much for joining us. You're very welcome as it's your first time. I promise we'll be good to you. Thanks for tuning in, Jack. Okay, how are we doing with the silver acrylic? Perfect. Yeah.
That's it, yeah, that's how we have
Yeah.
too many lines in
Because,
there.
yeah, there we go. That's fine. The thing is, what you want to do is pass it, and then if it's not enough, you can pass it again. What you don't want to do is pass it and it be too much. You can always build it up, can't you? Much harder to take it away. And effectively, you're trying to make it look like rock. Not, that's the attitude I like. Let's go for it. Whack it on. Whack it on. Don't think about it. Now we are all concentrating in the room, aren't we? And isn't it horrible when the art tutor lurks just as you're about to swipe your acrylic paint on? It's rubbish, isn't it? I'm very good at lurking. You're lucky I lurk in front of you. At home, when I'm teaching, I usually lurk behind people. It's very disconcerting. Brilliant. Yeah, so take your time. Don't worry. Don't rush. Don't rush, don't rush, don't rush. This is kind of the underpainting to your project, because we're going to unleash watercolour on it later. And I do mean unleash. If you've done one of my workshops before, you know I don't hold back on colour. Right, I'm going to have a bit of a clean up, actually, while I'm standing here. Because I am a terror for not cleaning my palette knives, which is why they end up looking the way they do. If you have a metal palette knife and you've let acrylic paint dry on it, you can also use some sandpaper to sand off a metal blade. But don't do what I did, which was one of my palette knives, which is my favourite palette knife to use. I've sanded it so thin, it's now a dangerous weapon. So, you know, you've got to be a bit careful. And I think we're done with that now. I don't think we're going to need that again. How are we doing? There's no rush at all. Don't rush it at home. We've got plenty of time. Plenty of time. They're looking good. They're looking good in the classroom today. How are you getting on at home? Let's have a look. Yeah, lovely. No, you'll be all right. You'll be fine. Lovely. Very good. Very good indeed. Nice striking shapes. Yeah? All you've got to worry about at the moment is, do your rocks look like they're in front of your lighthouse? That's the only question you need to ask yourself. If the answer is yes, then you're good. Very careful textures like it. I'm going to come down this side. I'm going to lurk from this end. Very good. Really good. Yeah, they're right popping forward, aren't they? Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay. How are we doing over here? Are they good? Yeah, lovely. Yeah. It's fine. Don't worry. Breathe. Exhale, for goodness sake. Because we do this, don't we? Am I doing the right thing? Don't you love it when people go, oh, do you paint? It must be so relaxing. Really not. How are we doing over here? Are we good? What are we doing? Teaspoon in one hand, palette knife in the other. Isn't that a funny thing, that you do it on the practice piece and you go, that's perfect, that's exactly what I want. And then something happens between your practice piece and your actual piece. And I think it's to do with expectation. On your practice piece, you just go, oh, pfft, and whack it on. And then it gets to your painting and you go, oh, I've got to be so careful. So you kind of need the same approach, really. Lovely. Very good. Are you a faffing monitor? Love it. Love it. Well, yes. Oh, this is it. I lecture people all the time about faffing, and I am the world's worst at it. A whole do as I say, not as I do mentality. Very good. Very good. Very brave. Well done. Yes, I would say so. It's perfect because it looks rock-like. It's really good. Very good. Yeah, we're good, we're good, we're good. Gents, how are you getting on? It's lovely. The rocks look like they're in front of the lighthouse, and that's what you're after. A bit of distance and a bit of texture. Things that are textured will come towards you in a painting, won't they? Because you can't see texture at a distance. So you want texture to be in the foreground. And then, of course, we've got our lighthouse to go in, which is our middle distance. And, of course, it's got red on it. And then we've got our sky, which is our backdrop. So you've got those three, like theatre scenery, progressing towards you. That's what you're after. Very good. No, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry at all. Lovely. Very good. Are we all still happy? Some people saying yes. Some people staying very quiet. Okay. So, couple of things to do before we break for lunch today. The first thing is to get back on top of your rock shapes, okay? You're going to need your pencil and a scrappy bit of kitchen roll. Now, you can copy the line drawing, the painting, or the photograph. It's entirely up to you. My recommendation is that you don't do any of those things. My recommendation is that you look at what you've got and go with that. So I can still see very clearly on mine where some of my rock shapes are, and other areas I've kind of lost the shape. All you really need to be concerned with is where you have the opportunity to put shadows, because it's your shadows that are going to describe your rocks, not the rocks themselves. So, for example, this is the bit that you have to go, what is she talking about? Down here, can you see this area of my painting here? I've got some silver, I've got a little bit of watercolour ground, and then I've got a big giant space before my next rock starts. That is going to be a shadow, because the There's no acrylic paint on it, so it's not going to get repelled. There's no watercolour ground down here. There's just a little bit of collage paper and some watercolour paper. So you're kind of thinking in reverse at the moment. The whitest areas are the bits that are going to be the darkest later on. And this is why people find painting rocks so tricky. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I understand with my pencil that that is the top of a rock. And the reason you need a bit of kitchen roll is because you will need to clean the nib of your pencil off. And it definitely comes down here. So can you see just a few pencil marks have reclaimed that edge so that I know that is the top of one rock and that is the shadow of the next. Here, it gets a bit more confusing. I've definitely got a rock shape coming up here. But down here, I feel like I need to put a little bit of a line in. And I might move some of my textures, but that's what your finger's for, shoving it back in. But there's definitely going to be a shadow area coming down here. Can you see that line I've just put in? Because, of course, in there is going to be a lovely deep shadow that I can pop in. I've got the same over here. So sometimes you can stick to your original drawing, and sometimes you just have to look at the textures that you've been left with and say to yourself, right, that's a rock, that's not a rock. It's up to you. Now up here, I haven't got any textures at all. Let's leave that one to chance, shall we? I'm going to extend some of the shapes of my rocks. So, for example, over here, I've got the bottom of a bit of collage material, so I'm actually going to extend that line out. And down here, I've got an edge that I didn't even anticipate I was going to have. So we'll pop that one in too. And again, a bit like redrawing over your trace down, it helps you to understand where your rocks are going to stop and start. Okay, I'm going to do a quick whip round everybody. If I can help with your rock shapes, then shout. If you'd like me to go away, then tell me. Everyone's too polite. You could do with help. Marvellous. That stops the people in the front row having to have me lurk around them. Let's have a look. Yeah. Right, so, for example, here, you're going to have a shadow, aren't you? Mm. And here, you've got a very definite edge. So it would be worth, yeah, that line that goes down there. Yeah. It would be worth drawing that in to kind of go, here's my rock. That's the leading edge of it. There we go. And you don't need to do it all over, just bits where it's kind of blindingly obvious. There's another one there. Can you see you've got an edge? Oh, yeah. Along there. That's it. You're good. You're done. No faffing. Well done. I love people's anti-faffing things that they have to do. Some people have to literally put all the materials away and not touch them. Some people have to sit on their hands. I usually have to go and make a coffee or take the dog for a walk or something. Go feed the chickens, whatever's going to stop me. That's it. Very good. Yeah, lovely. Look at those. Very good indeed. Yeah, you've got some cracking edges, haven't you? They're going to be awesome. Yeah, because this is going to be a lovely shadow. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Yeah, very definite. How are we doing? It also goes to prove that there's this odd thing about painting that pencil is kind of seen as the first process, and then you have to put your pencil away, and then nothing else can happen with your pencil. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't change your mind about stuff. No reason at all. It's your painting, you get to do what you like with it. If you want to put your rock in a different place, you put your rock in a different place. Who?
Is that sort of
Yeah, that would be okay. This is a lovely one here. Really strong and exactly like Portland Bill. You get these really square rocks.
Is that, I've just done that top.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. That's good. No, I think that's good.
Is it enough?
Yeah, I would say. And hopefully they start to look like rocks then. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, because you're going to get some awesome shadows in amongst there. You're all right. Yeah, playing. That's what you should be. Painting should be fun. Okay, you do have to breathe in a brown paper bag on occasion, but, you know. Right. One more thing. One more thing before we break for lunch. We today are going to do what I call a double sky. So that means doing a sky and then doing another sky over the top of it. Because what tends to happen, if we're going for drama in our painting, and let's face it, if you want your lighthouse to look as white as it can possibly be, I mean, the whole point of a lighthouse is that it warns shipping when the weather is rough. I've taken a very beautiful photograph of it in perfect sunshine, but that doesn't really sum up what it's designed to do. So let's put it in a dramatic setting. If you want your lighthouse to look bright and shiny and white, it needs to have a dark next to it. And I know that the minute that I start saying, put a dark in with watercolour into the sky, is that moment with the brown paper bag, isn't it? Okay. Oh no, I can't possibly make it dark enough. So we'll do it in 2 layers today. Rather than having to do it in one go, we'll do a double sky. We'll put a layer down now, and then over lunchtime, your textures can be drying, your sky can be drying, and then we can come back to it and we can kind of improve the look of it. Deep breaths, everyone. So the way that we are going to do it, we're going to attempt to do a vignette. So a vignette is a soft edge. Rather than painting left to right on our piece of paper, we're going to try to add to the atmosphere of our piece by letting the colour diffuse just into the background. Now, the good news is that you don't have to do the dark bit till after lunch. Okay? What you need on it now is some kind of bright colours in the background. So if I may, if you can humour me for 5 minutes, I'll show you the things that you need before you start and the way that you might find is achievable. You're going to need a spray bottle. You're going to need your size 10 imitation sable brush. You're going to need your posh bit of kitchen roll. Okay? Now, the reason that I'm so particular about kitchen roll is because this type of kitchen roll is the kitchen roll that is designed to not fall apart on you when you use it. The cheaper stuff is great for mopping up and doing all sorts of things, but we are going to do a little bit of rag rolling in our sky. So you're going to use your kitchen roll around to make textures. So the first thing you need to do is to scrunch up your posh bit of kitchen roll several times, because what you really don't want to happen is that you get that lovely pattern in the background. I've told the story many times, but I'll tell it again because it does make me chuckle every time. I once used a brand of kitchen roll that had little babies. And I forgot to screw it up, and I had little babies in my sky. It was terribly surreal. So knock all the texture out of it. And then take hold of your piece of kitchen roll and just kind of scrunch it up in a long line. Don't worry, it's not a paper fan. Don't have to concertina it. But what you want is it in a long line, and that can just kind of go to one side. To start with, in our sky, we're going to be using the top 2 colours. So like I said, these are the SAA watercolours. We're using cerulean and we're using cobalt violet. Now, both of these watercolours granulate. And that means that the pigment is such that in the Saunders Waterford paper, it will settle in a particular way. The pigment is attracted to itself, and it will settle in the troughs of the watercolour paper, and you end up with this fabulous kind of granules across the surface, and it's great for drama. Lots of people don't like granulating colours. I am a massive fan of granulating colours because I think they take care of so much on your piece of paper without you having to do anything. So the first thing I'm going to do, yes? Your water will be fine for this. Yeah, it'll be absolutely fine. Because for the most part, you're going to be using the spray bottle for the water rather than the water that's in your pot. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 puddles of colour on my palette. And this is kind of the crux of watercolour, isn't it? How much is enough? And the answer is that much. I don't know how much is enough because it depends on how much you put on your brush All I would say is that when you are mixing up a puddle of colour to use in a sky, mix 5 times as much as you think you need, and then it will be about right. Don't make it sticky. Don't make it kind of a tiny little puddle that you're going to use your brush in and then it will disappear. Also bear in mind that these are imitation sable brushes. They will hold twice as much water and twice as much colour as a normal nylon brush. So you kind of have to mix more than you need because otherwise your brush is just going to swallow it up. So I mix puddles of colour first. And then what I'm going to do is use my spray bottle in a kind of horseshoe shape, semicircular shape around my lighthouse. It doesn't matter if the water or the colour goes on the lighthouse, okay? I promise. No one ever believes me. I promise it's fine. So I'm going to spray water around, and the great bit of information that I can give you about watercolour painting is that you can never paint too wet. It's not possible. You can paint too dry very easily, but put down much more water than you need. Let me see if I can get that. Can you see? Very shiny, very wet. If it starts to run, that's a good thing. Yeah, not a kind of moment. So I'm going to wet it all around. And then I like my colour quite strong, so I'm actually going to pop it into the neat colour. And then here we go. Straight on. It's always good when there's people gasping in the room. Breathe. This is mine. You don't have to worry about it when it's mine. Pick up the cobalt violet. Get that in. And I'm going to take the colour down to the edge of my rocks. We're actually going to do something else with the rocks and this colour after lunch. But for the time being, get that colour in. Again, if it runs on the rocks, that's not a problem. But whack it on. You have to show watercolour who is boss. Take no prisoners. Whack it on. You can, if it's not moving as you would like, you can always spray it a bit more. But can you see the granulation now? Move it down just a little bit. It's splitting and it's running and it's doing all the things that watercolour does best. And then when you've got all the colour on, you take a deep breath and then you get hold of your kitchen roll and very lightly from different directions, you roll it on the surface to create your cloud shape. Sorry, they're all going, ooh, you know, it's hilarious. Oh dear. Now, it's very tempting to rag roll it and rag roll it and rag roll it and rag roll it, and then you go, oh, where's all my colour gone? And it's on here. But all you're after is controlling the amount of moisture that's on the surface, and then you get those beautiful patterns which look like clouds. And then when people go, oh, how did you do those clouds? You go, oh, it was nothing. And you don't tell them. I'm kidding. Give your brush a really good wash out and don't leave it in the water like I just did, or I'll get shot. And get your skies on. Do it. Make sure your colour is mixed up ahead of you spraying it. Make sure everything is prepared and ready, and then you can throw the colour at the surface and not care about it. Mine's already gone into the rocks, but this is a good thing. This is not a bad thing. And you know what? I'm not going to be mean to them. I was going to go and do a walk around, but it's just really mean when people are about to put colour on the surface. I'll watch from afar. I have a question. Let's deal with the question. A brusho-related question, okay. Jill.
Jill is asking about the longevity of brusho.
Okay.
She sold the brusho paint and she's worried that it's going to fade quickly and
Okay.
stop it fading.
Right, that's an excellent question, and it means that I get kept amused so that everyone can be faffing about with their skies, because it's quite a long answer. Brusho has a very bad reputation, a misplaced bad reputation for fading. There's a lot of hysteria out there about how brusho used in a painting will fade the minute that you look at it. Now, it all depends on how you treat your paintings anyway. So, for example, if you did a watercolour painting and you hung it in direct sunlight without any consideration for the type of glass that you're using or any varnishes or anything like that, which I'll come to in a second, it's going to fade. The same applies to Brusho, the same applies to oil paint, the same applies to acrylic paint. Now, there's things that you can do to a painting if you really are concerned, but what I can tell you is that the summer that's just gone, here in the UK, we had one of the best summers ever, and I completely forgot that I had a painting hanging in my studio window that was done in turquoise and orange Brusho. Completely forgot about it all summer. So for 6-8 weeks, it was hanging in direct sunlight with normal glass. I hadn't done a thing to it, and it has not faded. It hasn't faded at all. If you are concerned about anything fading, whether that's watercolour or Brusho or whatever it is, there's lots of things that you can do to put your mind at rest. One is use the best quality paper, the best quality surface that you possibly can. That's the first thing. The second thing you can do is when you come to frame it, use something called, sometimes it's called museum glass, sometimes it's called conservation glass. It's the type of glass that galleries use, big galleries like the National Gallery, that they put in front of paintings, and it reflects all the UV rays. There are also things like UV varnishes. There are spray UV varnishes which give your painting a coat to actually reflect the UV rays. And there's lots of things that you can do. But paintings shouldn't be hung in direct sunlight. They just shouldn't. They weren't designed to do that. If you go to any kind of archival gallery or museum, watercolour paintings and pastel paintings and the like are kept in dimly lit rooms. And that's not necessarily because they didn't have the technology to go with their paints. For the most part, they used paints dug straight out of the earth. They're not going to fade. They just need a bit of TLC, just like they don't want to be hung on chimney breasts, so things that have extreme changes in temperature. Paintings don't like being hung above radiators because of extreme changes in temperature. All of those types of things. And I understand that Brusho, you know, when people talk about Brusho, there is that, oh, I'm not going to use it because it fades. It will fade if you put it in sunlight, if you don't look after it. But I am here to tell you that I have never had a problem with it, not one at all. So thanks for your question, Jill, because I know lots of people ask me that about Brusho. And it does have a misplaced reputation, but I have never had an issue with it. So I hope equally that that puts your mind at rest. If you are worried and you've already sold a painting and you know the person that you sold it to, just make sure that they don't hang it in sunlight. Or just put a little label on the back of your paintings when you put them into exhibitions saying, please don't hang me in direct sunlight. Because most time people don't know how to hang them. So good luck with your Brusho painting, and thank you for the question, Jill. Thanks ever so much. Right, now I'm going to lurk. Get my lurking on. How are we doing? Very good. Get the colour on. Do a bit of rag rolling. Excellent. Look at that beautiful vignette. Look at that. All good. Very good. Oh, these are stunning. See what happens when I don't lurk? People get on with it. There we go. Very good. Aren't they lovely colours together? Just my signature colours, really. Are we good? No, you'll be fine. You'll be absolutely fine. Good? No, that's all right. That's what you want. You want this kind of misty, atmospheric thing. It will change as it dries as well. Yes, it will go lighter. That's why we're doing double sky today, because we're going to put all the darks in over the top. That's it. Very good. Well done. It's probably neat colour. So, but that's okay, because actually one of the things that we've got to do after lunch is put the darks right up to the edge, so it'll go. So it'll go, absolutely. That's all right. Just take care of some of those extra wet patches. Can you see those? You've got one there. Yeah, that's it. There we go. Give it a spray. That's it. Very good. Really good. Oh, excellent. I know it's you can still faff with kitchen roll, can't you? It's amazing. It's amazing. So we are coming to the end of our first half. Let's do a very, very quick recap. So we had our line drawing, which we used trace down to get it onto the paper. We then used our pencil just to kind of draw back in to make sure that we knew where our structure was. We used our silk tissue, our mulberry tissue, torn into shapes, where we used the Bindex to glue it back down. And then, what did we do after that? Watercolour ground. So much we've done this morning. Watercolour ground with a palette knife dragged over the top so that we've got that lovely texture. And then we started to look at using acrylic paint, which definitely repels watercolour, which we've dragged over the top. We then used our pencil to draw our lines back in to decide where our rock shapes were and weren't going to be. And then we performed a vignette. And we got our skies in. And now all of that needs to dry. And I think we all need to lie down in a dark room right now to recover. And we're going to come back after lunch. If you're watching us live, we return again at 2 o'clock. And we will finish off these paintings. We'll get the lighthouse in. We'll get the rocks in. We'll talk about shadow colours, double skies, getting our darks really dark, all of those kind of things. We'll see what occurs on our piece of paper. And we'll create a really atmospheric painting. Everybody in the room loves theirs right now. Yeah. And they're not mic'd, so I can say that. Hopefully you can join us for the second half. If you have any questions and you're watching us live, pop them in the chat window and I will answer them where I can. And I will look forward to seeing you after the break. Thanks, everyone.